welcome back to Flock Talk. Today we are going to be talking all about scritches. Scritches, for those of you who don't know, is simply giving your bird a tiny little head scratch or a little head massage to help alleviate some of the itchiness that they can experience while growing in new feathers. This behavior is one that many parrots will exhibit naturally. They will utilize it as a social behavior while they will preen one another, isolating that to just their head and their neck. That detail is incredibly important. Scritching your bird should only happen on the top of their head, just down to the back of their neck. Preening their chest or their backs or anywhere other than the head and neck area is usually reserved for a parrot's mate. If you preen your bird in an area other than just the head, it is very likely that you will accidentally sexually stimulate them, and you can run into a lot of behavioral problems that way. So it is very important that we stick our scritches to just the head and neck area. So now that we've got that bit out of the way, how do you scritch a bird? Well, every bird likes it a little bit differently, but what's important is that you take it slow and you only do what your bird wants you to do. While this is a social behavior and most birds will gladly take to scritches pretty quickly, not all birds like being scritched, and that's just the way that it is. You can absolutely counter condition this behavior and teach them to enjoy it and create that mental state of enjoying the scritches. But if your bird doesn't naturally want to be preened, there isn't a major reason for you to preen them. Birds can absolutely scratch their own heads, they can preen their own heads, they can get the sheaths off their heads on their own. They do not need you in order to achieve anything through scritching. It absolutely can serve some benefit, especially if they've got a lot of pin feathers going on up there, but it isn't totally necessary. If your bird doesn't enjoy it, you don't really need to teach them to like it. You can if you really want to, but I wouldn't push them into it for no real reason. So when first introducing your bird to scritches, it's very important that you approach them the correct way. If you just put your hand towards your bird and start wiggling your finger all up in their face, this can actually be taken as quite an aggressive behavior. They can think that you're bobbing your head and flailing at them and trying to be intimidating. So instead of approaching your bird straight away and wiggling your finger, what's best to do is actually gradually approach their face and gently rub their beak. Now, right here, it'll be really obvious to tell whether or not your bird wants it. If you present your hand to them in this little pinching motion and gently stroke their beak, they're either gonna go, oh, okay, you wanna preen me, I'll allow this to happen, or they're just gonna back away. If your bird backs away and says, no, I don't want you to be preening me, just stop. You don't need to keep pushing it. Your bird doesn't need to let you preen them. You don't have to preen your bird. They said no, just leave it at that. If your bird does want the scritches, what's gonna happen is you can start to wiggle your fingers a little closer either to the top of their head or just into their little cheeks. And you're gonna start gently ruffling the feathers in that area, and your bird should start to gently fluff up. If your bird is very new to this and has never had it happen before, they may not fluff up right away. They may just kind of take the motions of you kind of gently scratching them, and they may slowly start to get more comfortable with it as they realize what you're doing. Well, most birds will fully start to understand that you are participating in this preening behavior. Some birds might struggle to understand that your fingers are trying to mimic a bird's beak and need a little bit of time to understand exactly what you're trying to be doing in bird language. From this stage, it's important to take things very slow. If your bird is leaning their body away or their feathers aren't fluffing up, I would stop. Just because they aren't running away or flying away doesn't mean they're enjoying what's happening. A bird who is enjoying their scritches will massively expand their head. It will be super, super fluffy. It is extremely obvious that they are enjoying it. If you haven't seen any degree of them starting to fluff up and enjoy this, just stop, try again another day, give them a bit of a break, don't push them into it. If you sit there and keep trying and trying and trying and the bird's uncomfortable, they're just gonna start associating you coming towards them for a scritch with being unhappy and not having a good time. You will have a lot more success with getting your bird to cooperate and want to engage with scritches if you're finishing those sessions when they say that they are uncomfortable and would like you to stop. So you've got your bird mostly comfortable with what's going on, they're fluffing up, you've gone from scritching the beak into the feathers, and you can see that your bird's getting quite comfortable with the act of scritching. So how exactly do you scritch? What are you aiming for? What's the point of it? The main goal of scritching is generally to help alleviate the itchiness and get some of those pin feathers and sheaths flaked off of the bird's head to help their feathers grow in. Well, that is kind of the main overall purpose of scritching. That doesn't mean that that's the only goal of it or that you have to be so fixated on getting pin feathers and itchy feathers and helping them with that you ignore the fact that they're supposed to be comfortable and enjoying it. You don't have to be scritching your birds with the intent of getting an itchy feather off of their head or helping them sort something out. Scritching as a whole is just supposed to be a social, fun activity to help build a good bond, help establish some trust, and it just feels nice. It's like getting a little head rub. I find there's a lot of fallout with scritches where birds will start enjoying them and then end up hating them because their owners get so fixated on getting all the itchy feathers and achieving their main goal that they kind of forget to pay attention to the comfort of the bird and whether or not the bird is actually enjoying that experience at all. So while you're doing this, just keep in mind that you want your bird to be comfortable with the process. That's the whole point of scritching, is that you're giving the bird a pleasant experience. There's no otherworldly goal that you're supposed to be accomplishing here. You're just having a good time and bonding with your bird. How you go about scritching varies from bird to bird. One method is to go with the grain of the feathers, kind of taking the tip of your nail and gently scratching along the rows of the feathers. When the bird is fluffed up, you can kind of easily see how the feathers are laid out in the skin, and you can just gently scratch side to side between the rows. Other birds prefer a little bit of a scruffier ruffle to their feathers when you're scritching them, and prefer if you go up and down, stroking the feathers against the grain. Going against the grain tends to be the more preferred method for scritches. I couldn't really tell you why, but most birds do seem to prefer if you actually ruffle the feathers backwards, use your nails, and get a really good scratch going. Not all birds like a good scratchy nail though. Some may actually prefer if you take the flat fingertip and just gently massage the head instead. This is particularly common for birds who have a lot of feathers growing in on their head. Sometimes those feathers growing in can be extremely sore, so having a pointy scratchy nail going at them can actually hurt, so they might prefer if you take the pointer tip of your finger and just rub the area instead, so you can still alleviate some of that itchiness and some of that pain without accidentally putting too much pressure and hurting them. When you're going to actually remove a sheath, you have to be extremely careful. A sheath will generally look totally matte white when it is ready to come off. If you see ones that are black or are still very glossy, I would pretty much steer clear of those. Those feathers have active blood flow and they are very sore. So when you're preening around those areas, you may find your bird tilts their head towards them because it feels painful, it doesn't feel good, so they want you to solve that problem and alleviate that discomfort. However, you'll also find that if you go and you accidentally flick that feather a little bit, the bird will cheep, they might peck you and express that hurt. Generally speaking, you want to steer clear of those really sore areas. If you're going to go near them, just use the tip of your finger and gently rub around the feather instead. Once you've located a matte white sheath that is ready to flake off that your bird needs a little bit of help with, there's a couple different ways you can help take it off. The easiest method I like to use is to use my nails and just kind of gently brace the sheath against my thumb while just scratching lightly at the tip. Not really applying pressure, you're not trying to crack the whole sheath open, you're not trying to peel it off. You're just gently scratching it and bracing it, so that way if it's ready to come off, it will flake off. If you're having to apply significant amounts of pressure to this part of the feather, it's probably not ready and just needs another day or two before it will be primed to fall off. Some folks do like to use the rolling method where you will stick the feather between two fingers and just gently roll it back and forth. I don't personally like using that method because rolling the feather is also twisting it against their skin. And if that feather isn't totally done and there's active blood flow in there, you're twisting a lot of very sensitive nerves and it's going to be quite painful and uncomfortable. So I do prefer just bracing it against my finger and doing that little bit of a scratch. When it comes to where you scritch, leave that up to your bird. You can scratch their beaks, slowly move into the cheek feathers, and they will start to rotate and twist their heads to tell you where they would like you to be scratching. You don't need to look at their head and see a bunch of feathers that you think need to be preened and try and venture off and go over there. Your bird will often rotate their head back and tell you to go back to a different place anyways. Don't ignore what your bird is telling you for the sake of getting a bunch of feathers done off the top of their head. It will be a lot more beneficial and a lot more of a pleasant experience for your bird if you just let them guide you for where they would like you to be preening. Your bird is the one who knows what spot on their head is itchiest and what spot on their head they would like help with. So I would go with them, listen to them, they will rotate their heads around and show you exactly where they'd like their scritches. So that's gonna do it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for joining me here today, and I hope you enjoy scritching and bonding with your birds. I will see you all in the next video. Bye.